Wide receiver is the deepest position in fantasy football, and there's value to be had everywhere. Get to the details on that and so much more coming up with our wide receiver preview.
It's about that time.
Stone on Sports.
How's it going, everyone? You are tuned in to Stone Down Sports Fantasy Football. My name is Matt. Got the co-host Kyle here with me today, and that's right. It is our wide receiver preview edition and our last position preview of the preseason. That's a lot of pre's. I should have thought that out better. If you're new to the channel, or maybe you recognize us from Stone Down Sports Fantasy Baseball, this is our football channel, and we are on the march to something more than 17 subscribers, which is where we're at right now. So if you're enjoying this content, smash that like button, subscribe. If you don't want to see our ugly mugs, I don't really blame you. You can find us on your favorite podcasting app. Kyle, how the hell you doing, buddy? You ready for some football?
Dude, I am. Yep. Hank Williams Jr. I am ready for some damn football. That is for sure. I see we got Dubo in the chat. He's
got his first draft tonight.
Excellent. I did one yesterday afternoon that went different, but could be good. So, all right, we're going to get into it. Enough yapping here. We're going to talk about 22 wide receivers from an ADP of 3 all the way to over 100. So a lot of mix, a lot of some rookies as well. We'll get into it. First one, this Dallas wide receivers, targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns have all increased each year of his career, and he looks to repeat this year as the overall wide receiver one. Matt, tell us more about CeeDee Lamb.
Well, you are right. He was the number one wide receiver overall last season, scored 403 points in a PPR, and he was the top wide receiver in points per game at 23.7. That's not too bad for somebody that was the wide receiver 13 through the first 6 weeks of the season. But at this point, we all know about his slow start last year. There's no sense in really rehashing it. He finished within 5 points of his average just 5 times, but he had 7 games with 25 or more points. If you're not going to be close to average, by all means, rocket that score up. He had 10 wide receiver 1 finishes and 6 weeks inside the top 5. He's a very consistent dude. And from week 8 onward last year, he averaged 28.5 points per game, 7 more than the next best wide receiver. He had no fewer than 9 targets in that stretch and scored in 9 of those 11 games. His year-long numbers, 181 targets, 135 receptions, 1749 for yardage and 12 touchdowns. He also had 14 rush attempts for another 113 and 2 touchdowns on the ground. And Kyle, you were exactly right. Targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns have all increased year over year, every year in the league. Last year, too, he led the league in yards after the catch with 676 yards. He had a 91% route participation and a 30% target share, and he was one of just 4 wide receivers to garner more than 30% of his team's targets. I expect Dallas to continue their pass-heavy approach, considering what they have going on in the backfield and some challenges there in the offensive line as well. I don't know that he's going to repeat the 180 targets, but he should be a lock for 160. There's a very good reason he's a top wide receiver off the board. You don't really want to overthink it, but at the same time, I certainly understand some people may have some trepidation about him and him wanting a new deal and not really doing much in the preseason. And the thing that gets me is people will compare that to the Lev Bell situation years ago, but it's completely different. Lev Bell didn't want to play on the franchise tag. CeeDee Lamb is still under contract.
Right. It's true.
Absolutely no reason not to take him at or near the top of your drafts. Amon-Ra St. Brown was known as a high floor play, and then last season happened, and we saw just how high his ceiling can be. What are you expecting from him this year?
Oh, I mean, he's the number 1 option in a top 5 offense in the NFL. Yes, please, right? He's great. Everyone under the sun knows how good he is. Did you get it?
Yes.
All right. He finished as the wide receiver 3 in PPR last season. He averaged 20.7, one of just 5 receivers last year to average 20 plus PPR points. He played in 16 games. He was already managing early season. He is having some a toe injury, and he had to have steel plates in his cleats. Week 5, he missed. He tore his oblique completely off the bone from a hit he took in week 3, still played week 4 and played damn well. And then that came out during the receiver thing on Netflix. He had hand, foot, and mouth disease before that Monday night game against the Raiders. He played. He said he felt like he was running on pins and needles, and it even hurt to catch the ball. Dude went off 8 for 56 and a tutty, right? This guy is tough, okay? He's something that you want to win fantasy championships, draft you a baller like ARSB. He's going to suit up, pretty much no matter what. He had all career highs in targets with 164, receptions 119, yards over 1,500, and 10 touchdowns. And he had 75 first downs. Number 3 wide receiver in the league behind Tyreek and Lamb. Do you get points for first downs in your league? Some points have that. Make sure you check that. ARSB is even more valuable in those leagues. He had a PFF receiving grade of 90.7. It was the 6th best among wide receivers with at least 80 targets. And he was tied for the 6th best wide receiver in that same group with a PFF hands grade, his drop grade. Dude is great at catching the ball. And in 49 career regular season games, the cat has fumbled just once. Where'd he rank among 81 receivers with at least 50 targets? 12th in route share, 6th in target share, 5th in targets per route run, 5th in catch rate, 5th in yards per game, 8th in yards per route run, 16th in yards after the catch per reception, and 9th in red zone targets. As you can see, he's like really good and stuff. Okay. One more thing about that. The Lions have a great schedule in respect to playing indoors. 14 of their first 15 games are indoors. In week 9, they go to Green Bay. Other than that, it's all indoors until before Christmas in Chicago. I'm comfortable drafting him as early as pick 4. Really
Nice.
in this year.
I don't blame you. And we got a question here in the chat from Loud Boy. Our thoughts on Ramondre Stevenson. I think given where he is going, you can get him later in drafts. If you take the hero RB approach, I think he's a good secondary option at the position. The big thing with him is just staying on the field. When he plays 15, 16 games, he showed us a couple of years ago just exactly what he can do. He's a threat to catch the ball out of the backfield. He can grind out tough yards on the ground as well. The team did bring in Antonio Gibson. And look, there's a chance that Ramondre is going to lose some of that passing down opportunity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that New England isn't going to choose to throw the ball on first and second down as well. And if he's in there in that role, he's going to get those targets, plain and simple. He's a good cheap back. Like I said, New England hasn't named a starter yet. And, we know Jacoby Brissett can competently manage a game, right? But, just like you and I were talking the other day, Kyle, like if it's close, why not just run Drake May out there?
Yeah, I would. New staff, new regime there, new. I like that. I think that Stevenson could be relied upon, if healthy, when healthy, to really take a lot of pressure off of somebody like Drake May, for a rookie quarterback. So I like Stevenson. I think he's, like the 21st running back off the board. I think his ADP is just under 70. I don't hate him there at all. And I'd love him if he slipped even more.
Sure. And Dubo says he's got a draft tonight in auction keeper league. He kept Aiyuk, McBride, Nico, and Saquon and still has 122 to spend. Brother, that's a nice little core there.
I like it. $200 budget, probably guessing. But yeah, that is nice as well. I like McBride very much this year.
Me too.
Hopefully Aiyuk plays.
I'm sure he will.
We'll talk about Aiyuk shortly, but okay. Next guy we got is a Bengals wide receiver. He struggled after Joe Burrow got hurt last year. As long as both stay healthy this year, Jamar Chase should be a good bet for a top 5 fantasy finish with an overall wide receiver 1 ceiling. What do you think, Matt?
Well, he did practice for the first time today, and I'm sure that's going to help ease the fears of some people. Earlier in draft season, up until like the past week or so, in high stakes leagues, he was the third wide receiver off the board. He's now slipped to fourth, and ARSB has overtaken him. But really, when you're choosing between those two, there's not really a wrong choice, right? He finished last year as the wide receiver 11 with 262 points. He was 12th in points per game at 16.4. He had 3 games within 5 points of that average, 5 games over 20, and 6 games under 10 points. He had a career high 145 targets and 100 receptions, still turned in a 1,200-yard season, but he had a career low 7 touchdowns. The dude had 8 games with at least 75 yards or a touchdown, but none of those came after week 13. Joe Burrow was hurt for a good portion of the year, and look, let's be real. Jake Browning did a respectable job in his absence. When he's on the field, he's dynamite, great chemistry with Joe Burrow. He had a 92% route participation last year, a 26% target share. That may even go up a little bit with the departure of Tyler Boyd. To me, he's a rock solid top 5 option at the position in an offense that should score a lot of points if healthy. But I do understand if some people may have hesitation because of Joe Burrow's injury history. But one thing you want to remember, he still put up an 80 catch, 1,000-yard pace with Jake Browning in there. Like I mentioned, because of the bit of uncertainty, he is falling a bit, but still, like I said, he's an elite talent at the position. You hit the nail on the head, Kyle. He is somebody with the overall wide receiver 1 upside. He is a fantastic foundational piece for your team.
Definitely.
This season, Dubo, this is for you. We're going to find out just how QB-proof Jetta is. Cousins is gone. McCarthy is done for the year, and that leaves Sam Darnold. Are you expecting any regression from him this year, Kyle?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first month, 6 weeks, I think you're not going to see the normal JJ. I think it might take a while. I mean, he did decent, pretty well with what the hell was Nick Mullins last year, right? So, who really knows? The Vikings clearly view Darnold as an upgrade over Dobbs or Mullins or Hall. So, I mean, the question here is QB play. No one needs to really make a case for Justin Jefferson, the player, the receiver, right? So I think JJ will get his, but I think he'll even be negatively affected there by the poor QB play, or what I expect to be poor QB play. And it could cause a boomer bust type, inconsistency with JJ, something you're not really used to seeing in his career. And then when you add Hawkinson, probably not going to start the season, probably be on the injury reserve, miss the first 4 games. Jordan Addison's got a suspension looming. We'll see if that happens. Defenses could double JJ, and that could be a rough 4 to 6 weeks to start the season. You remember he missed time last year with that hammy, played in 10 games, still had 100 targets, 68 caught, over 1,000 yards, just 5 touchdowns. He did average 107.4 yards per game, which is actually more than he averaged the year before when he won AP Offensive Player of the Year. He averaged 20.2 PPR points per game, finished as the wide receiver 33 due to missing all that time. But he did set a career high in target share, career high in yards per route run, career high in his PFF receiving grade of 91.2. He was 7th in yards per reception, and he was tied for 10th in ADOT at 13.5 yards. So the QB question, the recency bias, it's kind of pushed Jefferson from the clear wide receiver 1 last season to about 4th or 5th at the position this year. Some say you should chase the upside more than you should worry about the QB. Others say, myself included, I'm taking ARSB over JJ this year. You probably won't ever hear me say that again in the future. But bold prediction. Kind of.
I can dig it.
Drafting this Cardinals rookie is a matter of risk tolerance and roster construction, right? What can we expect from Marvin Harrison Jr. playing alongside Kyler Murray, who hasn't thrown for 4,000 yards and has missed 18 games over the last 3 seasons? What do you think, man?
Well, we're talking about a dude, and as much as I hate Ohio State, this cat showed the ability to produce even with poor QB play in college. and he is going to get plenty of targets and opportunity as Kyler's wide receiver one and really the primary passing target in the offense overall. You know, the main competition from him was really going to be coming from, you know, the newly signed Zay Jones, who's now suspended for the first 5 games of the season, and Trey McBride. And chances are it's going to be McBride, who is the second target there in that offense. They have a new OC in town. Drew Petzing was QB coach in Cleveland last year, working under Kevin Stefanski. And, you know, there's some aspects of that offense to like as well. And look, Harrison has the size, speed, and athleticism you look for in a wide receiver prospect. He can work all levels of the field. In college, he had back-to-back 1,200-yard, 14 touchdown seasons. I think right now, to me, he's a high-end wide receiver 2 with low-end wide receiver 1 upside. And Kyler Murray has shown in the past that when he has a legit number 1 receiver, that receiver is going to get fed. I'm not necessarily expecting him to do what D-Hop did in 2020, 115 grabs, over 1,400 yards, and 6 touchdowns. But I don't think that something close to 100 receptions, 1,200 yards, and 8 touchdowns is out of the question, especially given the number of attempts that Murray averages. It was 33 last season in limited time, and that number is likely to increase now that he has a legit wide receiver 1 option. He is the 8th wide receiver off the board. He's got an early second round ADP. I do think he's being drafted at his ceiling, and you do need to understand that there's some risk with this dude because he is a rookie.
Yeah, a ton. I think he's going too early in drafts, but that's me. I mean, if Kyler Murray goes down there, the backup situation there is not good. You know, either Desmond Ridder or Clayton Tune.
Gross.
So
absolutely gross.
You need Kyler Murray to stay healthy, 15, 16 games for MH Jr. to really make a difference, I think.
That's a solid take.
Yeah.
There's finally a legit quarterback in Atlanta, albeit an older one, coming off a major injury. Is this the season we finally see Drake London put up the kind of year we know he's capable of?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes. I mean, by all accounts, Cousins has looked very good in training camp, and I think this will be, the breakout year for Drake London. So London can play. He just needs some help, and he finally got it. Like you mentioned, the offseason moves. They got Raheem Morris as head coach. They brought in Zach Robinson as OC. That really raised the bar. And then Kirk Cousins, that veteran that you mentioned, really took it to the next level. Last year, Drake London played in 16 games. He missed 1 week, I think it's week 9, with a groin injury. It is the only missed game of his career. He had 110 targets, 69 grabs, just over 900 yards, and just 2 touchdowns. He finished wide receiver 37 in PPR and averaged just under 9 points per game. He had just 2 top 12 finishes and also had 8 wide receiver 37 or worse finishes. Ugh, gross, right? Among 92 receivers with 40 targets, he ranked 25th in PFF receiving grade, 32nd in yards per route run, and just 45th in ADOT at 11.7. I think he's a great fit there for an X receiver because he can separate at a pretty elite level. He had a 71.8 success rate versus man coverage last season. That kind of came right in range of his rookie season, his career results as well. He's not a dominant route runner and separator on, like downfield routes, but he's darn near dominant in, base NFL patterns. His success rate, think on slants, curls, digs, and outs are really just nothing short of fantastic. He's very good. The Falcons are expected to be very good. They lead the NFC South in 9.5 wins on most sports books right now. This is his 3rd season he's entering. He's just 23 years old still. I think his ADP is right on. I would even reach to the early 2nd round if I was drafting him or if I was drafting. And I'll say it again, try and get a piece of that Atlanta Falcons offense. I'm really expecting some big things in fantasy for them this year. This LA Rams receiver burst onto the scene last year, capturing the single-season rookie record in yards and receptions. Matt, is there any doubt that Puka Nacua should be viewed as a wide receiver 1? Let's hear it.
I'm,
Let's
I'm
hear
not,
it.
I'm not big on him.
Yeah.
Look, he set the league on fire. He was an amazing waiver wire pickup. He went undrafted in most leagues, and if teams did draft him, it was at the very end of the draft. He finished as the wide receiver 4 in PPR with 298.5 points, wide receiver 6 in points per game at 17.6. He had 6 games within 5 points of that average, 7 games over 20 points, 4 games under 10. The rookie garnered 160 targets, which is elite. No two ways about it. 105 grabs, 1,486 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He had 7 100-yard games, 6 games with 10 or more targets, but only 1 after week 7. He had 7 top 10 finishes at the position, just 1 after week 7. 501 of his yards came in the first 4 weeks with Cooper Kupp out. With Kupp around, the targets and receptions between the two were roughly the same. Puka did have about 150 more yards. He was a little more efficient. McVay's offense has shown it can support 2 top 20-ish wide receivers, and he's done that about half the time he's been the head coach there. There are really no other legitimate pass targets other than he and Kupp. He's the number 9 wide receiver off the board, ADP of 15. I think he is being drafted at his absolute ceiling if Cooper Kupp is healthy. And if I want a piece of the Rams passing game, I'm actually going to take the discount with Cooper Kupp. Never really been that big of a Puka guy. He's just too expensive for me, quite frankly. If I could get him closer to the end of the second, maybe it's a different story.
All right.
There may not be anyone happier that CJ Stroud came to town than Nico Collins. But this year, there's more competition in the wide receiver room. Do you think we can see a repeat of last year's success?
I think that you can. I think he's the wide receiver 1 there. And if anything, they'll divert some attention away. But he's the number 13 wide receiver off the board. His ADP's right around 25. Guys, he was always an undervalued separator there. His first couple of years, he just never had the quarterback play to really support him. I think that was propelled, like you mentioned, with CJ Stroud. He had a breakout season in his 3rd year with the Texans. Last year, he had 109 targets. He caught 80 of them, almost 1,300 yards for 8th in the NFL and 8 touchdowns. In PPR, he averaged 17.4 points per game, finishing as the wide receiver 12. And he was really one of the best values in redrafts last year, considering most of you probably got him off the waiver wire. He had a target share, 24%. In all honestly, that's a little bit low for a team's wide receiver 1. I'd like to see that go up a little bit this year, but it might not with that extra competition there. He did rank 2nd among all wide receivers with 3.1 yards per route run. That is a huge feat achieved by only a select few players since 2017. Tyreek's done it the last 2 years. Kupp did it in 21 in that super year he had, and Julio Jones did it back in 2017. That's it. That's the list. Some damn good company there. ADOT was okay, kind of middling there at 11.5 yards, but those shorter passes turned into a ton of yards after the catch. Among wide receivers, he ranked 2nd with 6.9 yards after catch per reception, and he ranked 6th in average yaks above expectations, 2.5 yards. You can't get yak unless you catch the football first, right? Collins had a nice catch rate of 73.4. He ranked 16th among all pass catchers with at least 45 targets. So all wide receivers and all tight ends. He lines up mostly outside, did line up in the slot about a 5th of the time. We'll see how that shakes out this year. You know, despite the arrival of Stephon Diggs there impacting his target share, I think his efficiency will still remain high with, like I said earlier, another threat to kind of divert some attention away. I drafted him in my home league last season. I think it was for $9, slapped a 2-year contract on him. I had a feeling about him. I like him this year. I'd reach a little bit for him too, maybe 4 or 5 spots, nothing huge, but I like that offense this year.
Nice.
This Colts wide receiver has seen his catch and target totals increase every season. Matt, should fantasy managers be paying up for Michael Pittman with such a limited sample size with AR last year?
Absolutely not. He finished as a wide receiver 13 last year. He had 250 points, tied with Devontae Adams and Brandon Aiyuk as the wide receiver 15 in points per game at 15.6. He was very consistent. He had 10 games within 5 points of that average, 3 games over 20 points, and 3 games under 10. Unfortunately, those came in weeks 17 and 18. So, yeah, a few of you may have gotten burned by him in the fantasy playoffs. On the year, he had 156 targets, 109 grabs, 1,152 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And this dude just does not score TDs. He has 15 in his 4 seasons in the league. He had exactly 4 wide receiver 1 weekly finishes. But from week 6 through week 14, he finished no worse than wide receiver 17. So he had a nice, consistent run there. I am nervous about him because AR isn't even as good of a passer as Gardner Minshew, and it's not like Minshew is amazing. However, he should continue to receive the lion's share of targets. He had a 28.6% share last season, tying him with ARSB for 9th in the league. He's good with the ball in his hands. He ranked in the top 10 in both yards after contact and yards after the catch. However, he only broke 3 tackles. He's not really an explosive wide receiver. His ADOT was just 8.1 yards, and he had just 10 receptions of 20 yards or more, tied with 9 other players for 39th best. Right now, he's the 16th wide receiver off the board, sandwiched between Jalen Waddle and Deebo Samuel, both of which I would rather have, with an ADP of 27. I think that's roughly where he's going to finish, somewhere in the low to mid wide receiver 2 range. I don't really see a whole lot of upside or profit opportunity with him. And like I said, there's receivers who are going in the same range as him that I would rather have.
Yeah, I think even DeVonta Smith's like 35. I think I'd rather have him over Michael Pittman.
Yep. Oh, let me get that off the screen.
Oh,
there.
Sorry. My bad. Got it.
Though arguably just as talented as Marvin Harrison, this Giants rookie wide receiver is in a much worse situation. What's the scoop on Malik Nabers?
Well, he had a great season last year in his final year at LSU, 128 targets, 89 receptions, over 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns. The dude's explosive as any other wide receiver in recent memory. He's got elite acceleration and speed. He did not work out at the combine, but did a pro day at LSU. He had a 4.35 40, 42-inch vertical, and a 10.9 broad jump. All 3 marks would have ranked top 6 among all the wide receivers at the combine. He's a big play machine, right? Averaged 17.6 yards per catch, led all FBS players in plays of 20 plus yards and 30 plus yards. And he was really a weapon with the ball in his hands, averaging 6.6 yards after the catch. He's pretty versatile too. He has split time there between the slot 54% of the time and outside 46%. I really like that. He averaged a crazy 4.35 yards per route run in the inside versus 2.8 on the outside. His ball skills are less impressive, I think. He's got that raw athleticism, but I was generally underwhelmed by his ball skills. I think he has a tendency to let defenders get into his frame there on the deep balls. So there's good news and bad news that you kind of mentioned there in respect to team context. The bad news, obviously, is QB play. Daniel Jones has yet to reach 7 yards per pass attempt across 5 NFL seasons, and he averaged a career worst 5.7 last year. And now he's working back from the torn ACL he suffered last season. The good news is there's a ton of opportunities for Nabers when it comes to targets. The rest of the Giants receiving core is Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, Isaiah McKenzie, and possibly some other guys that don't even matter, right? So there's nothing close in that group that screams alpha, right? It's Nabers all the way. but it might not matter. We'll see. His explosiveness is great. The athleticism is great. He could be one of the big top play wide receiver threats in the NFL. I just don't love him at 31 this year with the QB play. I just don't think it's going to. If Daniel Jones doesn't play well again, it's whoever, DeVito or somebody else. But gross. I don't like it. Dynasty, snag him up. He's going to be great, but in regular redrafts leagues this year, I think I'm going to sit out and see what happens. This Eagles wide receiver finished as a top 20 wide receiver each of the past 2 seasons, and he's best suited to increase his fantasy production in Kellen Moore's offense. Matt, how much do you like DeVonta Smith this year?
I really like him. I really, really do. He was the wide receiver 19 last year, scored 227 points. He was a wide receiver 21 in points per game at 14.2. He had 8 games within 5 points of that average, 4 games below 10 points, and 4 games over 20. And he had 4 top 10 finishes at the position on the year, 112 targets, 81 grabs, 1066 for yardage, and 7 touchdowns. Second straight 1,000-yard, 7 touchdown season. He had 4 games with 10 or more targets and 200-yard games, but he also had 3 more with 96 yards or more. He's had a 90% plus route participation each of his seasons in the league. Last year was a career high 98%. This dude does not come off the field. His target share, though, did take a dip from 27% down to 24%, but he's still getting a healthy amount, especially as a wide receiver 2 on the team. His slot percentage was up to over 30% last year. Why is that important? Kyle, you mentioned it. Kellen Moore is the new OC in town. And to, I guess, give you the simplest explanation as to why that's important, CeeDee Lamb and Keenan Allen have absolutely eaten from the slot the past few seasons in Kellen Moore-led offenses. However, Smith isn't going to be the only one working from the slot. A.J. Brown will see a little bit of work there, and the newly acquired Jahan Dotson will likely see quite a bit of time there. If what he did with the Commanders is any indication, I think he had a slot percentage of around 40%. Another nice thing, Kellen Moore is going to bring motion to the Eagles offense. What an amazing concept, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
The Eagles, I think, were 30th in pre-snap motion last year. The Cowboys were in the top 5 when he was there. He is the 23rd wide receiver off the board. He's got an ADP of around 36. Not going to lie, Dotson coming there has poured a little bit of cold water on him for me, but I do still really like him. Any wide receiver going after him that are primary options are either flawed or their offense is. I think he's a good value there, and he's going to put up a good season. Damn it.
We got a question in the chat from Jeb Armstrong. Welcome to the show, man. Appreciate the question. Should I trade Puka for Marvin Harrison Jr.? His QB is Kyler. First thing I think is definitely I would do that. I think so many things need to go right in LA for Puka. Stafford needs to play most of the year, things like that. I just don't think somebody like Stetson Bennett is going to make a fantasy player out of Puka Nacua. I think MH3 is a nice trade there. I kind of like that. How do you think that?
I agree wholeheartedly. There is just so much that needs to go right for Puka to duplicate what he did last year, let alone improve on it. I don't really see that happening. By all accounts, Cooper Kupp is fully healthy coming into camp, and he's going to command his fair share of targets. And it was, like we mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, pretty much an even split. Marvin Harrison is going to eat.
Yeah.
Period.
I think so. Good question, Jeb. Good luck. If you please give us a like and subscribe. We'd appreciate it. We're here on Sundays in the off season for football. We will be back Tuesdays and Thursdays for fantasy football starting opening night, Thursday, September 5th. So don't miss us back then, or then I should say.
All right. There's been a lot of smoke around him recently, but as of now, Brandon Aiyuk is still a 49er. Do you think he can repeat or even surpass last season's performance?
I mean, he's coming off a historically efficient season. Okay. 16 games, 105 targets, 75 receptions, over 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns, 61 first downs. That's the good news. The bad news is he still finished 14th among wide receivers in PPR points, largely because he ranked 35th in targets per game, but he was a steady weekly producer for fantasy teams. He's a top 36 receiver in 13 out of 15 games. He ranked among the top 24 9 times, and he scored as a top 12 wide receiver 5 times. Catch rate from 20 to 22, his average career catch rate was 67.4, and his yards per reception average was 14.6. Last year, he caught over 71% of his targets, had a 13.8 ADOT, and he averaged almost 18 yards per reception. From 18 to 23, do you know how many receivers caught 70% of their passes with a 13 ADOT and a 17 yards per reception average on 75 targets? The answer is just one. Brandon Aiyuk. So at the top, I mentioned that historic efficiency. He was just high end. Among 80 wide receivers with 50 targets, he ranked 9th in catch rate, 2nd in yards per catch, and 1st in yards per target. His 12.8 yards per target was the 2nd best mark among 855 wide receiver seasons of 50-plus targets since 2014. It's insane. Now, we cannot talk, let's see, who we at here? I'm talking about Aiyuk. Messing stuff up here. So I think I have him as a negative regression candidate this year. I think those historic yards per target were huge, but, the guy's talented. I'm buying the offensive scheme. I'm buying the play caller too, and Kyle Shanahan. I love that offense. It's always great in fantasy to invest in the top offenses, and this is definitely one of them to do so. I just hope he plays. I just hope he plays. Sweet new sub. This Ravens wide receiver stepped into a featured role as a rookie and enters his sophomore season poised for a breakout and is a strong selection in the 5th round for fantasy drafts. Matt, what do you think about Zay Flowers?
He had a pretty damn good rookie year last year, all things considered. He finished as the wide receiver 30 overall with a little over 200 points, wide receiver 32 in points per game at 12.9. 7 games within 5 points of that average, 5 games under 10 points, 3 games over 20. Again, not too bad for a rookie. He had 3 wide receiver 1 finishes, all of them coming down the stretch. On the year, he had 108 targets, 77 grabs, 858 yards, and 5 touchdowns in 16 games. He had 5 games with 10 or more targets, and he even turned in a 100-yard game. He also scored a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. Dude is outstanding after the catch, 16th in YAC, top 10 in plays over 40 yards and over 50 yards. And he had a really nice 91% route participation and a 24% target share. However, with him, even though he's the wide receiver 1, he's not the primary target in that offense. That is Mark Andrews. And there's a big difference between when Andrews is out there and when he isn't. In the 8 games where Mark Andrews played less than 15% of the snaps, he saw a massive upswing in his fantasy production. With Mark Andrews on the field, Flowers had 2 touchdowns on 45 touches. In the other 9 games, he scored 6 touchdowns on 51 touches. From weeks 2 through 10, Mark Andrews had 17 red zone targets and 6 end zone targets. Flowers had 12 red zone targets and 0 end zone targets in that same span. In weeks 1 and 11 through 17, Flowers had 14 red zone targets and 5 end zone targets without Mark Andrews. When Mark Andrews isn't on the field, Zay Flowers is the clear number 1 option in that pass offense. And I'm really expecting the whole offense to take a step forward in year 2 with Todd Monken and Flowers' production along with it. I think a good comparison for him is DeVonta Smith and the jump he took from year 1 to year 2. Especially considering the similarities in the team context with a running QB being the second option in the pass offense, etc. Right now, he's the number 26 wide receiver off the board, an ADP right around 49 or 50, so right at the end of the 4th round. I think he's appropriately priced generally, but I do think there's some upside there for him to present some profit by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think he's definitely more valuable in PPR leagues because just how often he's targeted.
Sure. Yeah, he's something else. I wasn't really high on him coming into the season, but he showed up.
Mhm.
So, Kyle, I ragged on you for paying $36 for this Browns receiver when I got Stephon Diggs for just $1 more. Well, Amari Cooper is the one that finished as a top 20 wide receiver. Kyle, would you pay $36 for him again this year?
No, I would not. Yeah, I got caught there in a run there, and he was the last good guy in the tier, and I had to pay for him. So it happens. He played 15 games. He had a great season last year. 128 targets, 72 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Finished wide receiver 20 and averaged that magic number that Matt talks about, 15 points per game. He finished with a 23.6 target share. That was the 22nd highest. And he had a nice air yard share. That was the 4th highest. Air yards, that's just, how far the ball travels from line of scrimmage to the point of catch. Pretty much, your everything but yak. Okay. He had the best ADOT in his career at 14.1, tied for the 4th highest, and the 2.35 yards per route run, 15th highest. Yards per target was 12th highest, and his yards per reception was amazing at 17.4, put him as the 3rd highest wide receiver. So fantasy managers are drafting him as the wide receiver 25, despite finishing as the wide receiver 13 2 years ago, and then the 20 last year. You're all likely concerned about Deshaun Watson, right? However, in the 5 games that they played together, Cooper averaged 14.8 half PPR points per game. With Watson, Cooper averaged 2.73 yards per route run. That would have been the best mark of his career by a wide margin last year. The 11 other contests, including that loss in the playoffs they had, Cooper averaged just 1.99 yards per route run. So there's a certainly an argument there, being a small sample size, but some of the results are encouraging as well. Cooper's never been much of a target hog. That really hasn't been his thing throughout his career. I think that lowers his, ceiling as well. But if you throw in new OC there, Ken Dorsey, he's pretty pass happy. You have the uncertainty of when Nick Chubb will be back and how effective will he be after that major knee surgery anyway. I think it makes sense for the passing volume to but a slight boost in Cleveland. So he's still looks to be the top dog there in the receiving room for Cleveland. We'll see if the QB play can step up to help him. His ADP is the wide receiver 3 range, but consistently really delivered solid wide receiver 2/wide receiver 3 numbers. He's a solid draft target in fantasy drafts this year. Still solid.
I agree.
And that defense is going to keep them in games regardless of how well Watson plays or doesn't. So this Washington Commanders wide receiver has been pretty consistent, but now he is set to play with the best QB of his career with the arrival of Jaden Daniels. Matt, what can you tell everyone about Terry McLaurin?
Well, last year he finished as the wide receiver 31, scored 203 points. He was just the wide receiver 38 in points per game, though, at 12 flat. He had 14 games within 5 points of his average. Now that's some consistency. 6 games under 10 points and 6 games with 15 or more points. Totals on the year: 132 targets, 79 receptions, 1,002 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And that's his 4th straight season with 1,000 plus yards, 77 plus receptions, and 4 or 5 touchdowns. And he is just one of just 4 wide receivers to have 75 grabs and 1,000 yards each of the last 4 years. It's his 3rd straight season, starting all 17 games. He had a nice 88% route participation. Target share was kind of low, though, at just 23%. I'm not anticipating a huge jump for him in targets, if any, with the departure of Jahan Dotson. But new OC Cliff Kingsbury is running a much different offense than the bullshit they had there last season. His offense has averaged around 600 pass attempts in his 4 years as a head coach there in Arizona. And you're right, he's going to have the best QB of his career. Right now, he's the 31st wide receiver off the board. He's got an ADP of 54. And quite frankly, he has several finishes better than the 31st best wide receiver than that in his career. Because of the increase in attempts and QB quality, it seems like he's almost being drafted more towards his floor than his ceiling. I think he represents a damn nice value where he's going. And just depending on how my roster is constructed, he would be a priority target for me at this point in the draft.
Yeah, I love it. I think with Jaden Daniels, pretty good deep ball, fade ball, I should say. Terry McLaurin's going to eat on that. I like him a lot this year as well.
Yeah, I think he's going to do well. The Jags got clowned for signing Christian Kirk to the contract that they did, and all he's done is become their most reliable wide receiver. If he can play 15 or more games, can he be an every week starter for our fantasy teams this season?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the guy was having a monstrous season last year before he got hurt, core muscle, I believe it was, in weeks 2 through 12. He was wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game. He had a 22.6 target share, 30.5% air yard share, while producing 2.31 yards per route run. Pretty good. 85 targets he had, caught 57 of them, 787 yards, just 3 touchdowns. Finished wide receiver 47, averaging 12.5 points per game. He hit double-digit fantasy in 8 of his 11 games played in a really weird season for the Jacksonville Jaguars. What really makes it, I think that makes it hard to dispute his fantasy floor. He's developed into one of the better, more dependable slot receivers in this league. He played in the slot a ton, over 71% of the time. That was the 5th highest rate in the league. And playing in that slot gives him a high catch rate, making it easy to rack up PPR points. I love him in half or full PPR as well. He rarely has, he's not going to have those huge games like the other, elite receivers, but he's pretty damn dependable. ADOT was 10.7 yards. It was 33rd in the league. That kind of makes sense there, with that lower number playing in the slot as much as he did. Yak, not superb, just 4.4 per reception, put him 29th in the league. So the team context, they retooled the room there, wide receiver room in Jacksonville. Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones are out. That's exactly 200 targets up for redistribution this year. They brought in Gabe Davis in free agent. They drafted Brian Thomas Jr. Both of them this season. Gabe Davis never really inspires confidence as well. Brian Thomas, I think, can be good. I think next year we'll probably start to see some better things out of him this year. I do like Thomas a lot. Ton of exceptional speed, foot quickness, great verticality. At some point this season, probably later, he could steal some targets and some red zone looks away from Kirk. But I think, again, next year is going to be his year. Great grab in dynasty, though, of course. So the familiar faces there for what's the quarterback? Trevor Lawrence, are Kirk and Evan Ingram. So if Ingram didn't really, he had a great season, but he didn't really fully break out until Kirk was out with his injury. So I doubt Ingram is the clear option over Kirk entering this year. It's easy to forget we're just one season removed away from Kirk's wide receiver 11 finish in 2022. He had 84 receptions for over 1,100 yards and 8 damn touchdowns. So if Trevor Lawrence can get his head out of his butt, I'm predicting Kirk will be closer to them 22 numbers than he was last season. Kirk at, what is he, wide receiver 32 off the board, kind of feels a little bit like stealing, doesn't it, Matt? I think a high floor player like him, who is a legitimate threat to be the most targeted player on that team in 24. He's a great draft day value. I think it could outperform his ADP price tag by a pretty good margin.
I think so too.
This Chiefs wide receiver ADP is rising. He's an elite talent, and he profiles as the alpha target there in an offense led by Patrick Mahomes. What can fantasy managers expect from Rashee Rice this year?
Well, the first thing with him, like he's got some legal troubles but I do not anticipate any kind of disciplinary action coming from the league this season. And that's why you're starting to see his rise up draft boards. The legal process has not even really begun to play out. He finished last year as the wide receiver 27, scored 212 points. He was the wide receiver 29 in points per game at 13.3. He had 12 games within 5 points of his average, 5 games under 10 points, though none of them after week 11, and 4 games over 15 points, all of them from week 12 onward. He had 102 targets, 79 grabs, 938 yards, and 7 touchdowns in 16 games. He did sit out week 18, but he had some issues with drops. He tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stephon Diggs, and Devontae Adams with 8 of them. From weeks 12 through 17, so we're talking, the stretch in the playoffs, he was the wide receiver 4 with 3 top 10 finishes at the position. He had 43 grabs for 518 yards and 3 touchdowns in that span. And we see the same trend in his route participation and target share as well. Weeks 1 through 11, he had a 45% route participation and a 13% target share. Weeks 12 through 17, a 79% route participation rate and 27% target share. And he was also 7th in the league in red zone targets with 22. He was going in the 7th round just a few short weeks ago, but the helium has set in and he's now going in roughly the late 4th. The team did make 2 speedy additions to the offense in Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, but they're going to be working different parts of the field and should really help to open things up, not only for Rashee Rice, but for Travis Kelce as well.
Yep.
Right now, he's a 25th receiver off the board. Like I said, ADP around 49, 50, something like that. I think even with his recent rise, there is still a bit of room left for fantasy players to profit off drafting him there.
Yeah, some people will probably be buying the dip for sure.
Chris Godwin is moving back to the slot where he's had his most success. Is he a value at his ADP or is he going near his ceiling?
I think he's I think he's right on, actually. I just had a draft yesterday and he's 64 overall. I got him at 63, right on. I thought he would go a little sooner, but he didn't. So that slot rate last year was putrid at just 37%. He was always over 70% or higher the last couple seasons. So, but the new OC, Liam Cohen's, has repeatedly verified he will return to the slot role this season. And that's really where he's been most effective, in the middle of the field on those short to intermediate routes. I think that'll help him get back to a top 20 fantasy receiver this year. He finished 28 in PPR last season, averaging 12.3 points per game, 130 targets, 83 receptions, just over 1,000 yards, just 2 touchdowns. And he's never really been a big TD score anyway. His career high was 9 back in 2019, and he hasn't had more than 5 since 2020. Godwin finished 19th in targets, 15th in receptions, 23rd in yards, 24th in red zone targets, 18th in end zone targets, but 68th in touchdowns. His expected touchdowns, excuse me, I lost my spot. His expected touchdowns last year was 6.2, giving him the worst touchdown differential among any receivers last season, that minus 4.2. When you consider the Bucs threw for 28 touchdowns last year, it's just crazy. You know what it is?
Inconceivable.
That's right, inconceivable. With that said, I think Godwin is a strong candidate for positive touchdown regression this season. Even though it seemed like a down year last year, he still had his 3rd straight 1,000-yard season and 4th out of the last 5 years. The offense, it's good news. It's mostly intact from last season. Baker's there. Mike Evans is still there. Running back Rashad White is still there. The offense will look a little different this season. Dave Canales took off to take the Panthers job. And you got, like I mentioned, Liam Cohen, the new OC. He's mixed up the last few years with the Rams and I think Kentucky, University of Kentucky. He was their OC as well. And, Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield had quite the connection last year. It was shocking. I thought it would have been Godwin. I think Matt did too. But, Evans is getting older. I think you could start to see some age-related regression from him. That should help Godwin. Should really help only Godwin. I don't see anybody else on that team really taking those targets away. And Godwin, he's never really looked the same since that knee injury back in 21. So he's going to be 3 years out from that now. And it's still just his age 28 season. And more importantly, he missed no games last year due to injury for the first time since 2018. He also enters a contract year. That's usually big for fantasy as well. And I think being in the slot is going to be a better fit in that passing attack. Godwin, right here, bold prediction, will lead the team in targets and receptions this year, not Mike Evans. So he's often falling, geez, I can't talk, into wide receiver 4 territory in drafts. I'm much higher on him as a low end wide receiver 2, high end 3, though, this season. The ADP 64. He's the 34th wide receiver off the board. I like him. I mean, definitely he is somebody I think that I could put in my flex all year long and be happy.
I'd agree with that for sure. I'm pretty high on him as well.
This Chargers rookie lands in a spot with some good news and some bad news for fantasy. The good, lack of competition. The bad, the offensive scheme. His ceiling isn't great, but he projects to have the type of floor that few rookies have. Matt, how do you feel about Lad McConkey?
I'm pretty high on him, and there's been some back and forth this offseason about who people would rather have between him and Joshua Palmer, and there's some good arguments to be made on both sides, really. As far as McConkey goes, he is an outstanding route runner. He did have some injuries last season, a back and an ankle that limited his production. But I think if not for those injuries and the decreased production, he'd have been a first-round pick, and he wasn't that far off anyways. He's not a burner, but he's fast enough to keep defenses honest. He's going to be living in the first 2 levels of the field. He's not going to be used deep all that much. And really, like I said, Josh Palmer is the only thing between him and being the wide receiver 1 on the team. He had a healthy 3.26 yards per route run in his last season at Georgia and averaged 6+ yards after the catch all 3 years. He's likely going to be working out of the slot and utilizing the crispness of his cuts to get open. With Jim Harbaugh as the coach, this team's going to be throwing a lot less than what we are used to seeing out there in LA with the Chargers, but he should still see plenty of targets as long as he's the primary option. He's got really good hands. He's not the biggest guy at just 6 foot, 186, but we've seen plenty of players at his size excel in the league. I think he can be an above average wide receiver as soon as this season. He's the number 42 receiver off the board, got an ADP of 92. I think he's somebody with top 24 upside at an incredibly cheap price.
Yeah. And, even though they're not expected to throw the ball as much as they have in the past, when they do, they still got a freaking great caliber quarterback to do so. I'm still not completely down on Herbert like a lot of people are. We'll see what shakes out, but Lad could be a very big surprise this year. I'm not saying like a Puka surprise at all, but a very pleasant surprise.
And one thing to keep in mind too, I think with this team, there's going to be a lot of playing catch up in the second half because their defense is terrible.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit more opportunity there than what initially meets the eye. But now we're going to talk about another rookie wide receiver. Bears' Rome Odunze was a top 10 pick, but he's coming into a loaded wide receiver room. Can he show enough to work his way up the depth chart and be fantasy relevant this season?
It's going to be tough. I think it is going to be tough for him. I'll get to that in a second. He had 140 targets, 92 receptions, 1,600 yards, and 13 touchdowns last year in Washington. Forgot where he went to school there for a second. He also suffered a broken rib, punctured his lung in week 5 or the 5th game of the season, but he played through the injuries all year and never missed a game. I love that. He's a baller. He's got elite ball skills. He's a ability to locate and catch the ball. is unmatched in this class, in my opinion. He tracks the ball well, makes the necessary adjustments on the fly, and also possesses the body control to make those catches. So having size and speed is great, but having the ball skills to utilize them really make a huge difference, in my opinion. He threatens to catch any pass in his radius, honestly. So I think he's not the greatest separator. He overcomes this by being a little more physical in his routes and catching those contested catches. He had a 75% contested catch rate last year. Pretty damn good. In school, he had some route running issues there. There's a lot of video on there where he just didn't run a lot of clean routes. He rounded off his routes, sloppy footwork as well. So, but that's correctable. It's the NFL. It's a new system for him. The coaching will be good, but it does raise a small red flag. But I mean, who better to learn from than two veteran guys like Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, right? So I do love the team fit with the Bears. I think he fits the offense perfectly, really. Shane Waldron, the new OC there, came from Seattle. His system takes some pieces of the Sean McVay scheme as well. Waldron utilizes those varying route combinations to create those one-on-one matchups in the slot and down the field. If the QB can identify those pre-snap, it's going to make it even easier for on first read throws, something crucial for somebody like rookie QB Caleb Williams. So Odunze is going to be used as a downfield threat. They're going to utilize his speed and strength to win, kind of like, DK Metcalf did or was used in Seattle when Waldron was there. But just like Metcalf, Odunze's production's going to be inconsistent, right? If teams aren't keen in on him, there will be big games, but it's going to be boom or bust there as well. In drafts, he's going anywhere from 87 to 90, but the bottom line is he's a talented player, but he's limited in his situation. I think the only way he finishes as a top 20, 25 receiver this season, if either Keenan Allen or DJ Moore, suffer like a season-ending injury, God forbid.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's probably the smart take.
All right. We're headed north from Chicago up I-43 to Green Bay. This wide receiver room is chock full of talent. Is Romeo Doubs someone fantasy managers should draft?
It's possible. Let's look at what he did last year. He finished as the wide receiver 36, scored 174 points, but he was just the wide receiver 46 in points per game with 10.3. He had 11 games within 5 points of that average, which shouldn't be all that hard to do. 7 games under 10 points and 5 games over 15. Season-long totals, 96 targets, 59 grabs, 674, and 8 touchdowns. He had 2 games with 10 or more targets and 6 games with 6 or more. He had 2 wide receiver 1 finishes and 4 wide receiver 2 finishes, or wide receiver 2 or better, excuse me. He had an 80% route participation, 17% target share, and he was tied for 10th at the position with 18 red zone targets. Still, he was pretty touchdown dependent last year.
For sure.
And this year it's a very murky situation with 4 receivers vying for targets, along with promising tight end Musgrove that they have up there. However, he does look to have developed some pretty good chemistry with Jordan Love. And that was really on display this year during training camp. What we really want from him, though, is to be out there in 2 wide receiver sets, but things still aren't really clear on that yet. He's got a couple teammates in Jaden Reed and Christian Watson that are going about 40 picks before him. He is the 51st wide receiver off the board with an ADP, in between 105, 110, something like that, roughly at the 9-10 turn. I see him as a touchdown dependent floor flex play. But anybody who says that they have a great grasp on what exactly is going on and how those receivers are going to be deployed, at least as we sit here at 8:03 p.m., is bullshitting you, because nobody knows yet.
Yeah, agreed. It is, and it could change week to week who the man
Absolutely,
is, depending on the game plan, the game script, and that's the fun of fantasy football.
I think there's going to be a lot of 3 for 45 games for him.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, Very well.
After, yep. Oh shit! Let me take the thing off there. Forgot about that. After leaving Foxborough for Las Vegas, Jacoby Myers turned in a wide receiver 2 season for the first time, despite playing second fiddle to Davante Adams. Uncle Rico's in town now to sling a football over them mountains. Do you think he can support 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it has a lot to do with Brock Bowers being on the team now as well. He was wide receiver 24 in PPR last year, 13.7 points per game, mostly fueled by a career high in touchdowns. He was fairly reliable. He was scoring as a top 36 wide receiver in 10 of his 16 games played. And he had 4 top 12 weeks, the same number as DeVonta Adams, his teammate on the other side of the field. He had 106 targets, 71 receptions, just over 800 yards, 8 touchdowns in the air, and a couple on the ground. His targets ranked 28th among wide receivers. His target share ranked 39th at the position. And among 32 wide receivers with at least 100 targets, pretty poor marks. His receiving grade was second to last. His yards per route run, second to last. His yak per reception, bottom 5. And his ADOT of under 10 was in the bottom 7. And drop percentage on targets passes, those are on target passes dropped by the receiver. He was in the bottom half as well. But his contested catch rate was pretty damn good, 7th best in the league. So I will say he has been Mr. Consistency there for the past 3 seasons. The targets per game, receptions per game, yards per game, they've all remained pretty close each year. It's really amazing how consistent he's been, across 2 teams, multiple coaches, multiple quarterbacks as well. So we know it's safe to say what Myers is at this point, right? He's a dependable floor receiver you draft for some depth. He's never had 900 yards in a season. He's now entering his age 28 season. You got Davante Adams there, as I mentioned before. Now Brock Bowers is on the team. I think eventually he's going to take a large target share away from Jacoby Myers. So Myers is a downgrade for me due to Bowers' arrival, the QB play, and really the non-existent lack of upside with him. So, but he looks like a solid value in the wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 range for me.
I can dig that. Keep your expectations low with him and you won't be disappointed.
Yeah,
hopefully.
For sure. All right. So, on the replay there, give us a like and subscribe. We got you some good information here. If you enjoy our content, the Fantasy Football Podcast League is full. Reminder for draft. It is this Wednesday, the 28th at 8:30 Eastern. I know AJ's back in it again this year, looking to defend his championship. Scheduling note, we will be back for fantasy football on Tuesdays and Thursdays, until the fantasy season ends early next year. And we'll start that on Thursday, September 5th. That is NFL opening night. We'll be on at, I don't know, 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock that night. And starting Sunday, September 18th at noon Eastern, we're bringing back our show, Tinker Time. That's where we have all our last minute. We'll answer all your last minute questions, start sit questions, any questions, roster management, all of it. Our goal, every show there, is to answer every question. We will not leave you hanging there. So good luck, everyone, in their drafts that are coming up. Have a great evening.